Hoo-dee-hoo. Hello, everybody. Let me turn this music off. Welcome to episode 105. Damn it, it's still on. No, you get out of here, sir. But welcome to the show. This is our first episode of the third year. Yeah, I'm not giving up. I'm staying strong, and I found a perfect guest to start this year off. So I hope you all welcome her and support her as much as you've supported everyone else. And all her information is in the description. So let's just get to it, and let's hope to have another good year. All right, guys. See you on the next episode. Okay, guys, back again, as I always say. As I said, I'm always trying to find great guests, and I think just about probably once or twice a week, I check Podmatch just for new people, and I type in my typical search, disability, disabled, whatever, and see if anyone new shows up. And some weeks there is, and some weeks there are, a couple new people. And obviously this week I found two new people. One you'll hear coming up, and one you'll hear now. And like I said, it's been a godsend for the podcast, because I really have found so many inspiring people. And, I was reading her story, and I got to meet her the other night as she was going for a stroll around the neighborhood. And so I was very grateful to, like I said, it's very therapeutic for me to meet all these people, because I have my own problems. And, as I said before, the goal is to kind of make sure people don't feel alone. And, it makes me feel the same way, because knowing that there's so many people out there fighting for, so much in their lives, and inner strength is a really big thing that I thrive off of, and just appreciate and respect in people. And this woman has that as well. So you want to kind of tell us your name and obviously a little about yourself?
Yeah, of course. My name is Ryan. I go by Ryan Ray Harbuck in the professional world, I suppose. And I am a paraplegic. I was in a car accident when I was 16 years old. And so I believe, TJ, that's how you found me, was just solely based on being a paraplegic and being paralyzed and using a wheelchair. So I'll tell you guys a little bit about that accident and that night, and who I am and who I was.
Before you do that, do you from what you do remember before the accident, like what kind of, obviously a lot changed in your life after the accident. What kind of person were you before?
So yeah, that's a great question. So before my accident, I would say a very typical kid. I was a teenager. I went to one of the biggest high schools in the Denver area. Mm-hmm. And I was a swimmer, a competitive swimmer, and really felt that a big part of my identity. I had a decent social circle, but I definitely was shy and enjoyed playing the role of a wallflower to my peers and authority figures and such. I was extremely soft-spoken. I remember I think I was in 5th grade, and I had a parent-teacher conference, and my teacher asked my parents if I ever spoke at home.
Oh,
so
yeah, I was there too with that.
Yeah, and so I was, I think just innately I have always been sort of an introverted person, for whatever reason. That's just how I've been. I think that, as a teenager, I was dealing with all of the things that teenagers deal with in terms of feeling a little bit, whether I was socially accepted by my peers, and if I was in the popular group or not, and was I wearing the right thing? Was I doing the right thing? Was I saying the right thing? And I think that is something, unfortunately, that is probably true for most people's adolescent and teenage experience, is just really trying to find yourself when you're really actually just trying to be like everyone else. And I think that that's really where I was at that point in my life.
Right. Well, yeah, when you're so, again, like you said, trying to fit in with certain crowds and whatever, and kind of going with that, like, did you have any interactions with anybody who were paraplegics or anybody with disabilities? And like, if so, like, what was your take on it? Obviously beforehand, before knowing you were actually going to be one. Um, yeah.
Yeah. No, I actually, I thought about that quite a bit right after my accident. Like, what did I think of people in wheelchairs, or what was my response? And I didn't really have one. I couldn't come up with a person in my life, or even a person that I remember seeing on the street that used a wheelchair. And, I know that's ignorant, and that it was probably entirely not the case. But I didn't really pay attention.
Right.
And I think that both something that was unfortunate, but also something that I had to realize, like, maybe that I'm not a big deal to everybody else.
No, I mean, the one thing, like, again, you're also 16, so you're young and dumb and whatever, but as we all were at that age, but you're also, being a wallflower and trying to figure out who you are, your identity, and, obviously you're going through puberty and all that and everything that's kind of coming. Obviously it's happened earlier, but all these things are kind of colliding, and boys and whatever you're attracted to, and you're trying not to be the dork or the nerd or whatever, and so you're so
Totally.
consumed with your life, and you're trying to fit in, and it's a very selfish time, but you're a kid, so you're trying to find ways to not step on those landmines, if you will, to not stand out or whatever way. And so other people that are going through their problems, like, you just don't have time for it. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person, but again, you're so consumed and worried about being, weird, or, like I said, sticking out, that you're just trying to figure out how you fit in this little this community, or whatever you want to call it. And especially in high school. High school is rough for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And I think, like, I actually just finished writing a book, my memoir of my experience growing up. And one of the things that I really talk about in my earlier chapters of going back to my world and my peers after my accident is, like, trying to find that cool factor, because that's what it was when you were 16, is what I'm doing right now cool? Do other people think I'm cool? That was
Right.
really, like, the foundation of it all. And after my accident, being sort of the only person in a wheelchair that I knew in my, immediate bubble, it was really hard for me to find, well, what's cool? Do I have a cool wheelchair? Is that such a thing?
Right. But I mean, like, and I said this to you the other day, but, well, first, with what you just said with high school, like, really, no one's really cool in high school. I mean, the definition of what high school cool is, sure, when you're an athlete or whatever, but most of those people are just brick-headed dumb. And there's nothing about them. They're just attractive, or they do something that draws attention to them. But really, no kid is really cool. I was a dweeb kid, and again, I tried to fit in whatever I can, and I had really nice sneakers, so then people kind of was like, oh, he's kind of cool. But I had the eye thing that stood out or whatever. But, what I was saying to you the other day about how you were strolling around your neighborhood in your wheelchair, and, you just had the confidence of just, I'm still me, and I might stick out or whatever. People may stare or whatever, whether they do or don't. Obviously, some of it's just a false narrative that goes through your head. But, that's cool. Like, the things you do now that you're an adult and mature, and, you've overcome so much, like, that's what really cool is. Back then in high school, like, trying to find what cool is, you have no idea, because you really don't know shit about life. And so cool really doesn't matter. I mean, yeah, we all made mistakes, but at the end of the day, you're 16. Like, what are you going to do? As long as you didn't kill anybody or whatever, like, you should be good.
Right.
But yeah, so I like I said, I just kind of give people a little idea of who you were before, because a lot of people don't, with me, it happened when I was 4, so I don't really have a whole lot of life to share with people as far as before my disability took a hold. And some people have it later in life, and some people are born with it and whatever, but it's always nice to paint a picture of where people's mindsets are before an accident happens, because some people really are just naive, and they go through life like, nothing can happen to me. And obviously you're 16, so you expect that. And then tragedy strikes, and it's like, oh my God, I have to change my whole life, and I don't have a choice.
Right. Well, and we spoke to this the other day that I really think that my accident happened at a really positive time in my life because I was so young and because I, didn't really know much else other than I wanted to keep doing everything that I did before and I wanted to be like everyone else. And so from the very start, that's really where my mindset was and that's where my goals went is just, how can I be like everybody else again? And I think that sort of naivete and that sort of just like silliness about it actually really saved me in a lot of ways. And it kept me from really dwelling on my past experiences. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. How old are you? Is that okay to ask?
Yeah, of course. I'm 41.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, again, you also forget some certain things and obviously a car accident can shake a little out of you, but, but what you can remember, it's always just kind of a juxtaposition to see where someone starts off and how quickly life can turn for you. Because I think a lot of people, especially with people in wheelchairs or just people who have disabilities, especially on the physical outside, because, we have all these invisible disabilities, but the ones who really show, obviously you can't hide your disability. It's kind of a real reminder to a lot of others that, hey, this can happen to you. Like this isn't, again, there's some freak accidents, there's some really rare disabilities that people get from whatever. But, in your case, you were in a car. A lot of people are driving. There's millions upon billions of people driving right now. And it's one false accident, regardless if it's your fault or someone else's, or it's just raining or whatever, you can become disabled very quickly. And, even if you're disabled, you can become disabled again. It's not, there's nothing protecting you from it. You just have to try it out. You got to hope that you don't go through what we went through. And hopefully the landmines, you just don't step on the wrong thing and explode. Hopefully you go through life and your pain is more emotional than physical because it's not hard to become us.
Right. Well, and something that you just touched on was the fact that my disability is something very visible to the world. And I always sort of struggle with that inwardly about, what is better? Is it the fact that my disability is displayed to the world? And so it gives somebody, sort of like a natural way of addressing me and, and so seeing that I have, some inherent struggles and things like that, or is it the people that have disabilities that you don't see outwardly that really have it more difficult in terms of just communicating and integrating with the rest of the world? And I don't really know the answer to that.
Right. Well, but before we kind of delve into the accident, you were saying you were struggling with, you're the wallflower, you're the girl that people aren't paying attention to. But then when the accident happens, now you're standing out, regardless if you want to be.
Exactly.
Did you, like, the weirdness of that, like, did you, in a weird way, I mean, obviously you probably wanted to go back the way you were, right?
Absolutely. That was such a hard time. I remember, I went back to school. So my accident happened in February, and I spent pretty much the rest of that school year in the hospital, and I was discharged and just in time for the summer. And so I kind of had like those summer months to really start to get a good idea of what my life was going to be like and how, how to do like a daily routine. And I actually was able to learn how to drive again. And so I got some independence back that way. But then, stepping back into that school, and that would be for my senior year of high school that fall, was really, really difficult because, like you said, I didn't really want to be noticed. And now all of a sudden I knew that everybody knew who I was. They knew what had happened to me, and people reacted. And for the most part, people reacted in a way that was best for themselves. And I understand that now, but it was really difficult because there were people that I were fairly acquainted with that I spent, classes with and walking to other classes with, and that I really enjoyed, that no longer really knew how to talk to me and how to approach me. And so those friendships just went away because I didn't do anything about it either. And, and on the flip side of that, I think there was, groups of really popular kids that wanted, to be in my limelight a little bit that I didn't really want, and would start to talk to me and want to be my friend or hang out with me. And I just saw that as, something really fake. And, regardless of whether it was or not, that's how I perceived it. And that really hurt. And it really, I really didn't enjoy being back in the world in that way. And I just, like you said, is I just kind of wanted to be invisible. I wanted to go back to being the way that I was. And, now all of a sudden I was the girl that was in a wheelchair, that was in an accident. And I would go into a classroom and they'd have to like prop me up next to the teacher's desk to have a desk to sit at because,
that's the worst.
They had like the desks with the chair attachments, and there was no way I was going to try to like finagle that.
Yeah. You kind of became like a local school celebrity, because when you hear celebrities, they're just like, oh, no one ever paid attention to me. And now that I have money and fame, girls are throwing themselves at me. And it's like, it's kind of the equivalent to that, where you're getting these fake friendships when no one ever cared to talk to you. I had that in high school where my senior year, it came out my grades for my junior year was like at the top of the class or top of the school. And no one really knew because I was quiet and I kind of stayed to myself, and a lot of people didn't pay attention to me. And then it was like, I remember when they announced my grades, when they were announcing everybody's, and everyone in my class turned around and was like, him? And then I had people coming up to me say, hey, can you help me with calculus? I'm like, look, I hate calculus. You think I'm going to help you? And you never talked to me. I let you borrow a pen and you never gave it back. Like, I just started being evil. I just started remembering all the shit people did. And I'm like, not that I was I was bullied in like preschool, middle school, those type of times. But when it comes to high school, I was good, but I just didn't have a lot of friends. I had a decent amount of friends, but it was so interesting. All of a sudden now, like, and it was for a different reason than yours, but people were now paying attention to me, whereas I was just a weird blind kid that no one really cared to talk to. And now it's like, oh, you're smart. Oh, now we could talk to you. Now we can make you one of the popular. And it's like, no, thank you. I'm good. You take care of yourself.
Well, and my accident, the way that it happened, it actually did get very, very publicized by the local media and such, because it was kind of a traumatic event. And so, beyond the kids in my school, like the community knew about it and knew about me. And there was a long while where I could barely go anywhere out in public without somebody asking if I was that girl.
Wow.
Kind of crazy. Yeah.
So why don't you just go ahead? Why don't you just take us into that night and kind of how it all unfolded, I guess?
Yeah, sure. So, I was 16. I was in the middle of my high school swim season, and our high school put on a dance every year where it was like a Sadie Hawkins style, where the girls asked the boys. And I had a boyfriend at the time, and he went to a different school, and I really wanted to go to this dance. And so I sort of suckered two of my girlfriends from the swim team to invite two of his friends that also went to this other school. And
you girls are traitors.
It worked. And so it was three of us high school girls from the swim team, and then three boys from this other school. And, we planned out the night accordingly. We went to dinner and went to the dance. And I will stop for a second. I will tell you that all of this that I'm telling you is from information that I have learned about the accident, because I actually have no memory of it.
Wow. Okay.
I have no memory from from even like the day before my accident to about a week after. And so, because of that, I think that it made it a lot easier for me to kind of rise above it. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly much easier to talk about it.
Right.
But so anyways, so from everything that I've pieced together, from everything that everyone has told me, I'm telling you the story.
I know, you're fine.
So anyway, so we were, our plan as this group, we were going to go, I believe, to one of my friend's house to watch a movie. But while we were at the dance, we ran into another group of friends who were going to go bowling. And so we decided to follow them and go bowling as well. For the evening, for us to all be able to fit in the car together rather than, doing anything extravagant like getting a limo or anything like that. One of my girlfriends was able to borrow her parents' Suburban, which was a 6-seater, so it fit all of us in the car pretty naturally. And nobody is totally sure what happened, but we were driving on the highway to go to this bowling alley, and the driver of our car swerved the wheel. There's some thought that she was just doing it to joke around, something like that, and lost control of the car, and the car ended up flipping and crossing the grass median of the highway, and it hit a car head on. The driver of that car that we hit passed away instantly, and our car rolled and flipped, and I ended up flying out of the car and landed, they estimated, about 75 feet away. And so I sustained a lot of injuries just from that, just beyond my spinal cord injury, which is the reason why I am paralyzed and in a wheelchair.
Were you in the back passenger, or were you?
I was in the very back. So where the seats, where there's kind of like a cargo area and there's like small seats there, that's where I was, with my boyfriend, and he actually passed away instantly from the impact. And I somehow broke through the side window and flew out. And from what I was told from the state troopers that night, is they actually had a hard time finding me, that they knew that I existed. There was at least one of the passengers in the car that was sort of coherent and was able to talk and say, there were 6 of us in the car, 3 boys, 3 girls, and sort of go through all of that. And when they finally found me, I wasn't really breathing. I was losing a lot of blood. I had actually cut an artery in my arm. My legs were really mangled. I had a lot of road rash. And so from my understanding, the paramedics basically just scooped me up, threw me in an ambulance, and hoped that I was going to make it to the hospital. And so obviously I did.
How many survived from the accident? You said that your boyfriend died, but what about the other 4?
So everybody else survived. There were 2 brain injuries that were sustained during that car accident among 2 of my friends, and that was really, really hard. And to just sort of understand what a traumatic brain injury is and how does one recover from that. Thankfully, both of those people have done a remarkable job recovering over the years and live fairly normal lives to this day, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. And so, everybody had something. Everybody was pretty banged up. And I think that's one of the reasons why it became such a sort of like a newsworthy event, because, it was all these high school kids. There was no drugs or alcohol involved. They were never quite able to determine whether I had my seatbelt on or not. And, that's something that I've always sort of tried to struggle, and really come to terms with. And I just really hope for my sake and for everybody else that I did my best and I had it on, and so I don't have that sort of like regret in my life. But so I guess back to the story, I made it to the hospital. I had, beyond my spinal cord injury, I sustained pretty significant road rash. I had collapsed my lungs, and so they hooked me up to a ventilator machine to breathe for me. I had broken both of my legs to the point where they had to put rods in them to sort of put them back together. I had to get skin grafts put on my legs to kind of put in place of some of the skin that had been lost from just, I guess, running, rolling through the asphalt of the highway, and broke both of my arms, my hips, my shoulder, just pretty much everything. And so it took a really, really long time, even just to get to the point where I could sit up again. And so, like I said, I don't have any recollection until about a week after, and I was in the ICU unit for a whole month after my accident. And I was hooked up to a ventilator that entire time. I didn't get off the ventilator until they moved me to a multi-trauma unit for a month. And then from there, I was moved to a local rehab facility that specializes in spinal cord injuries and brain injuries. And it happens to be one of the top facilities in the nation. And so I was super, super lucky. And that was an amazing place that, and that's where I really kind of learned what my new life was going to be like. And I think, going back to the way that I sort of was treating it is, that, I had no memory of my accident. And so there was really nothing to dwell on in that respect. And so it was really easy for me to be able to just separate my life before the accident and my life afterwards. And so from there, I took my focus and put it back on, like, well, what kind of backpack was I going to wear at school? How was I going to be cool that way? And, what kind of car could I get into and could I drive? And so my focus wasn't really, what had happened to me and what was I going to do for the rest of my life, or how was I going to live again or breathe again or swim again. And it was just, for me, it was, well, I'm going to do those things again. And sure enough, like the next year when I went to school, I signed up to swim on our high school swim team because that's something that I always did. And that was like a huge part of me. And I remember that being a very pivotal moment as well. It's just getting back into the pool and realizing that this is really hard. And it was something that, where I was realizing that, I really took for granted some of the talents that I had and some of the push and drive that I was wasting before my accident. And, I remember being in the water and watching all these girls passing me because clearly they were much, much faster than me and could sustain a lot more in the water. And just like being just really upset about the fact that I couldn't do that. But being able to be in the water again and being able to actually swim, I think was really pivotal for me. And I didn't really understand it until many years later, right, how that truly was like a saving moment for myself.
One other thing, before we kind of go away from the accident, did you have any survivor's guilt as far as with your boyfriend dying?
I wouldn't say that I had survivor's guilt. I think, though, that there were people from my accident that absolutely did and probably still do to this day, because there were people that, were less injured than myself or the two that had the brain injury, or obviously my boyfriend who passed away. Right. And so I think that those individuals did have some survivor's guilt. And, and I actually recall, kind of trying to help them through some things. And, but I will say that even like the driver of my accident that night, we sort of parted ways pretty quickly after it happened, because I think it got really, really hard for her to see me, because again, I was that visible reminder of that evening. And right. She dealt with a lot of depression and emotional things and trauma just to try to get past that herself. And so I didn't blame her for one bit. And as unfortunate as it was, like it had to happen for her to be able to move forward.
Well, I think it helps you. I mean, I don't know any way it can help, but it might have helped that you weren't the driver. Because if you were the driver, sure. even if your accident still happened the way it did and you flew out the window or whatever, someone dies on they're all relying on you to get to them from point A to point B. And whoever you want to blame, who can remember who actually caused the accident, whatever, that's irrelevant. But even if you weren't at fault, the fact that someone died and brain injuries and all this thing, regardless of what happened to you, I'm sure it would have been a lot harder if you were the actual one behind the wheel.
Totally. And I think it's human nature for people to want to place blame on things to be able to help themselves understand it. And I, to this day, truly understand the fact that it was an accident, and they call it an accident because there really is, it wasn't intentional. No one meant for it to happen. No one wanted it to happen. And there's no sense in placing blame on anybody.
Yeah. Well, and this is kind of why, when you see some really good parents, when they were constantly checking on their kids, especially when they're at the age that you were, just, let me know when you get home and be okay. Totally. Don't go to these certain parties where people are putting stuff in people's drinks and there's drugs and sex and all that, because look, man, in this case, you guys were all sober. You were just going to have some fun, bowl and whatever you were going to do. And, one thing leads to another, and all of a sudden a tragedy happens and someone dies, a couple, and then three or four major injuries, actually a couple deaths because you said the other driver. And it's just people lose their lives. And now, cops have to show up at somebody's door and say, hey, your kid's no longer here. And it's gotta be terrible.
Right. And it's, it's that cliche, a split second and your entire life is changed forever. And I think that, people don't realize how fleeting things are and how things can change dramatically in an instant, in less than an instant.
Yeah, that's why I like some of those. And I know people probably think they're annoying because they're kind of like the modern day cigarette commercials, but the ones where they're showing like someone's their last text message and then they're dead because, they were too busy looking down. And it's like, no, that's super important because I've been in cars with people and I can't drive. And I'm trusting you to get me a place. And even though I'm also thankful for you driving me, but I'm also trusting you to get me to where I need to go to. And if you're looking down at the phone, like, you're going to kill us. It's a huge potential you could kill us. I like that some of those commercials because they're very chilling, where it's just you see a text message and you'll have a little conversation and then all of a sudden you hear, two cars colliding and then that's it. And it's like, yeah, man, there's a lot, especially at a young age, 16-year-old girls, that's what they're doing. They're texting. And so, it's, like I said, there's so many accidents that do happen and it's, like I said, so many people die or become deformed or whatever term you want to use. There's a lot of tragedy that just happens, and it just, car accident or not, just like I said, you could become disabled at an instant. And all of a sudden, like I said, your life is one way and now it's entirely different. But, I'm sure, like I said, you've become a very good person. You've turned into, like you're starting to own your disability. And I know you've, I'm sure you still have your depression and so on, but, it might have happened. I don't know. Maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth, but do you feel like this happened for a reason? Like, did you feel like you become a better person because of the accident?
Yeah. Well, and honestly, I think that's like one of the mottos for my life is that things happen for a reason. And I think that I developed that probably early on as sort of a coping mechanism, because if I truly felt like I deserved to be paralyzed or that things don't have any meaning or any sense, I think that would have been really hard for me to move forward. And I think that, so I think very early on, I just kind of was like, well, this was supposed to happen. And I am a better person because of it. And, to be honest, I think that I've probably been able to accomplish things that I would never have otherwise, in my life. And I owe a lot to the perspective that I've gained from my accident and from just being, so close to death and understanding like just how valuable and also how fragile life is. And I think that a lot of that came from me understanding acceptance. And that is like a huge piece. I think, I wrote about that. Actually, I'll tell you this. So there were, a few days back, maybe a week ago at this point, was like International Day of Disabilities Day or something like that.
Okay.
And so I went through my manuscript. I searched for the word disabled because I was like, oh, I'll find a quote that I talked about being disabled and I'll post it on my social media, blah, 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 whatever. And there was not a single time I used the words disabled or disability in my entire manuscript. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And sure, I used wheelchair a ton and paralyzed even and paraplegic even, but there wasn't one time in that entire 75,000 word manuscript that I actually used the word disabled. And so, which I didn't realize until I was searching for it. And so then I went kind of through my manuscript and was looking for well, what could I post? What could I post about, being disabled? And I found a lot of times that I spoke about acceptance. And there's a chapter of in my book that's called The Recipe for My Acceptance of Your Acceptance of Accepting Me.
Gotcha. I like it.
And it stems from just the fact that not only did I have to accept my accident and accept my disability and just accept, myself as a whole person. I also had to accept the way others perceived me. I had to accept my natural surroundings and the fact that they weren't always going to be what I would consider accessible to me. And I also had to accept the way that others accepted me. And And again, I think that was something that I took in really early on, because after my senior year, I went right to college. And again, still trying to be like everybody else, and still trying to live my life as like normally and as unassuming as possible. And I realized really early on that I could do that as long as I was willing to accept and be okay with myself. And as long as I was able to show, my community, my peers, my classmates, what have you, that I was okay. And it kind of became this like invisible job for myself. It is this job of like, I'm going to show you that I'm okay. I really am okay. And then that'll make you okay. And it really was the truth. Once I think, anytime you have like a new experience with somebody, especially since I do have a very visible disability, as soon as somebody understood that I was all right and I was just a kid in a wheelchair, then, it became okay. And it wasn't an issue. And I think that I have worked really, really hard in my whole life to make my wheelchair and my disability a non-issue for everybody else, as well as for myself.
Yeah.
And I think that ultimately is what has helped me sort of go beyond my disability. And, and I never forget, and I never have forgotten what happened or what the circumstances are, but I certainly forgave it all. And I think that is really important for me, at least.
Well, there's always a huge process you have to go through, no matter how old you are. And obviously, I talk to so many people, and a lot of it is when if it's not something they're born with, but when something happens to them and their life changes for a while, you're kind of numb to it. It's not, you don't really understand it. And usually the people around you are taking it the hardest.
Totally.
Because you're still in shock, and obviously you were in such bad shape too. And so then once maybe 6 months, whatever goes by, and then it starts to hit you when, obviously you're out of the hospital and everything else, and you come to terms with, oh, shit, what is this? Like, this is not the life that I just had.
Right.
And then, as life progresses and you start to realize, like, even if you start to have moments where you come to terms like, okay, you know what? I'm in a wheelchair. Okay, I could deal with that. Then you actually start to get out into the world, and then your disability gets so much harder because now people aren't accepting you the way they did before, or however you perceive it to be, but you're different. And, and so that's why a lot of people will tell you that, the disability gets harder, beyond the disability itself. Like, the disability is rough, and there's always going to be days that are better than others. And psychologically and mentally, there may be days you don't want to get out of bed because it's like, well, why? I got to try so much harder, and it's just better if I just lay here. But then when you actually get past that and you still do everything else, and you struggle to take a bath or whatever it is that is hard for you to do, cook or whatever, go get down the steps obviously you don't go down the steps, but you do what you got to do. And then you step out into the world, and you go to school or you go to work or you do whatever every other person does. And then you realize like, oh, like, yeah, like it's much harder to do everything else. And it's not necessarily my fault. It's other people making my disability harder on me. And that's always something that's very hard to cope with.
Yeah, this actually just came flooding back. I remember when I was first injured and first kind of like exploring my new world. I remember being like at the mall or something and thinking like, why does everybody think that I'm hard of hearing? Because I felt like every single person that came up to me
talk to you louder,
was talking to me very loud, very enunciated, and it was like, what are these people's problems?
Yep.
And
I've been there.
And that, and that's just, and it's really to no one's fault. Like, nobody was trying to make me feel badly, and I understand that fully. But yeah, the way that the world works, it is a lot harder when you do have a disability or just something that makes you different than everybody else around you.
Yeah, but when you do come on the outside, on the other side of it, and life kicks you around, and if you're not in a place where you're suicidal, or you've learned to come to terms with who you are, and you learn to love your disability as best as you can, because there's always, we're all still insecure and all that. But when you come on the other side of it, you kind of you're so much tougher to the world, because the older I get and the more, I was talking to somebody, a friend of mine, and she was talking about her bad news, and I was saying, well, we're kind of built for that. Even though that's kind of sad,
Mm-hmm.
but we're built for bad news. We're built for that because we've endured so much. And, I don't know, you toughen up, and sometimes it sucks because sometimes you get too tough and it's hard to let people in. It's hard to really trust anyone or accept anyone because
Mm-hmm.
you feel like they're not going to love you or accept you for who you are because you look like this or whatever. But when you actually do kind of figure out your individuality and you kind of learn to love the deepest parts of you, not to be corny, but you start to really accept, what people perceive to be wrong and what you thought was wrong, in your case with your legs, you really become a very strong person, and you kind of morph into the best person you could have ever become, with or without the accident.
Absolutely. And that was something that I learned in writing my book. I didn't really, have like a goal in mind of like why I was going to write it or what I was writing. And I don't really think that I originally wrote it for anybody. But when it was done and I went back through it, what I learned from it was that I have had a lot of instances of just like a natural vulnerability in my life, because of my accident, because of whatever, my disability. And those instances of those vulnerabilities, that feeling like truly icky and alone and isolated, that's when I learned that I had true strength and that I was brave and that I could do a lot more than I would have ever considered for myself. And that's really what I sort of taught myself through writing this book, was that like, wow, you can really do a lot with your vulnerabilities if you let yourself.
Yeah, of course. So kind of go from where you kind of left off. You were obviously, you're in a pool, people are passing you, you're still dealing with that. Like, where do we go from here with your life?
Well, I think, like I said, like I was just like, my main agenda was just to continue on as I was and do it like everyone else. And obviously that wasn't going to happen the way that I was doing it before. And, and in terms of like swimming, obviously I wasn't going to make the state team that year or really, do anything wonderfully in the pool. I learned that I could still do the things that I wanted to do, but they were going to be different. And that was like the take home lesson, I think, of swimming that year. And that was a really good lesson for me to learn going into college. And that, I went to a 4-year college and I got my degree in biology. And I really think that I actually chose that major because of the time that I spent in the hospital and how it really sort of kind of ignited something in terms of like my learning for the sciences and the human body. And so that's kind of an interesting take from there. And then, as I have considered myself and my life, just something that things are going to happen for a reason, I became a swim coach. And from there, I became a teacher and I taught high school biology for 9 years. And from there, I ended up back in the pool and trying to compete myself again, because I felt like I had some like unresolved regrets and issues of from the past of me not giving my all to something. And so I kind of like at one point made a promise to myself that I was going to try as hard as I could to get to the Paralympics and see what happened. And so I spent 2 years training in the water again to try to make the Paralympic team, which if somebody's listening and doesn't know, that the Paralympics have actually been getting a lot more press lately in the last few years. And so I think it has become much more of like a household name, but it's the games that run alongside the Olympics. And they're for people with physical disabilities, sometimes cognitive, but for the most part, physical disabilities. And so I trained for that for 2 solid years, to the point where I was getting up at 3:30 every morning so I could get a full practice in before I went and taught school for a full day. and then coached in that evening. And so by the time I made it to the Paralympic Games that year, that was 2012, I really felt at peace with myself, because I knew that I had done everything in my power and all I had left was to try. And I swim a great meet. And I always had this, like, going into the meet, I had this like weird feeling like this is going to be a life-changing moment for myself. And I didn't know if that was because I was going to make the team or because it was something else. But I just had this like sneaking feeling that like this is going to be something monumental. And lo and behold, it really was for me. I ended up the very last night of the meet, I was getting ready to swim my final swim, and I met a coach that had just been starting to coach Paralympics. He had a little person that he was coaching that was trying to make the Paralympic team as well. Mm-hmm. We had a brief conversation right before my last event, and I scurried away and swam, and we had exchanged phone numbers and emails so that we could kind of talk more about coaching and coaching Paralympic things, because it's a very different ball game than able-bodied swimming or Paralympic, or even just like the Olympic Games. And long story short, we ended up connecting through text and email, and then we started Skyping. And honest to God, 3 months later, we were married. And that, you know, I didn't make the Paralympic team. And I realized that I was fine with it, because I knew that I had put all of myself and all of my energy into it. And there wasn't a single thing I would have changed. And I felt really good about that experience. And obviously I felt really good about, you know, having this chance meeting with this guy that saw me for who I was and not for what I wasn't or would never be. And it was really easy for us to connect. And I think at that point, both of us were well into our 30s, and it was like, hey, let's not wait any longer. And we got married after just 3 months of meeting. And he was living in North Carolina at the time, and so he moved here to Colorado, where I'm at. And we began coaching swimming together. And now to this day, we own a swim team, the two of us. And our 7-year-old swims on the team, and I have a 2-year-old as well, both boys, and they keep me extremely busy. Yeah.
I mean, especially, you know, with your condition and everything, like some of these parents who have kids, like I know someone who I had on the podcast named Natalie, and she has chronic regional pain syndrome, and she's always, most of the time, is in a wheelchair, but she has 2 kids that are disabled, and they're in wheelchairs, and she has to get them around. And it's like, yeah, I told her, like, I'm like, you're Mother of the Year. Like, I don't know how you do this. Like, I don't, and on, you know, and not in your case, but in her case, she's a single mother. And it's like, dude, like, I don't understand. Like, you know, and that's why, like, you know, I'm always in awe of what, you know, I kind of take myself out of my situation, and I know what I've done is great and things like that. But, you know, when I listen to like your story, it's like, yeah, you're like a real live, like, superhero in a way. Like, you do things that are, you don't have to, like, you continue to push yourself, and you have this, you know, and again, I'm sure you have really bad days, and, you know, emotionally you get down or whatever, but you keep going, and there's such an inner strength to keep pushing and knowing that, you know, that none of this is easy. Like, for you to swim, and because, you know, you look at swimmers, they use their legs all the time.
Yes, they do.
Michael Phelps didn't become the best in the world by just using his arms. And, you know, but what you do, and you find a way to fit in. And I think I said this to you the other day, but that's why I've always used the analogy of, like, people with disabilities are always, it's the equivalent of trying to get into a house that has no doors or no windows. You know, it's a world that we don't fit in. We don't, in some ways, people will say we don't even belong, but we always find a way to get in that stupid house, no matter, even though the obstacles seems like there's no way in hell we're getting in there. And then, like,
well, and I think that's something that is exactly what my disability has taught me. It's taught me to navigate the world and to think really critically about things and to try different options and, to really not be stagnant in a black or white, because that's not how the world is. And that's not how it's going to ever be for me. And I think that's something really beautiful that being disabled has taught me.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, the older I get and the more I have experiences with people like you, like it makes me appreciate everything I've been through, and it makes me understand like how amazing we are. Because like I said, I'm always super attracted to inner strength and just how strong a person can be, no matter how tough their life is. There was that whole Rocky movie where he says, no one's going to beat you down more than life. And it's up to you to get up. And he's going to kick you down, and it's going to keep doing. But the more you get up, the stronger you become. And, it's true, because if like I said, there's so many people that just when you listen to the story on paper and you say this and this happened to this person, and this and that, and this and that, and the story keeps going, and you're just like, okay, how are you still here? Like, how haven't you killed yourself? Yeah. How haven't you emotionally given up? Like, how are, like, all these things come into play. And when you look at it on paper, you're just like, I don't know how a person survives that. And then you look at them, 10 years later after you read that story, you go like, wow, like that's how strong a human can be when they get to a place mentally that they're just unbreakable.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'll tell you that being a mom now, makes that even more apparent to me, because it's not about me anymore. And, I think that, the struggles that I have, they go away because my fight is for my kids.
Yeah. Yeah. But that kind of embodies who you are as a person, because, obviously you have kids and the mother kicks in and all that, but you have enough issues that it's like, well, yeah, but I have kids, but I also, I have these issues to deal with, and I can't give them the time I need to right now, but you still do. Do you have any daughters?
No, I have 2 sons.
2 sons. Okay. Wow. Well, either way, you're still going to end up being a real role model to them. But, and I know we kind of talked about it before and we talked off mic, but how was like your family as far as growing up and to now, as far as, were they supportive of you and everything you went through?
So I think, when I had my accident, my family was sort of in the middle of falling apart. And I think that my accident may have accelerated it a bit, but probably in the end for the best. Before my accident, my parents weren't connecting very well. They didn't really speak to one another. I don't think they really liked one another. And to be honest, I was a kid and I didn't really understand. I didn't really know what had happened or if anything had happened, but I knew that they just didn't really enjoy being around each other. I have a sister who's 3 years younger. And so she was 13 at the time of my accident. And that I know hit her really hard. And it was like several years after my accident, she was struggling with different, depression and things like that. And I do recall at one time she had a therapist that told me that my accident, was responsible for sort of like turning her brain off and shutting her down. And, she had a lot of leftover scars and things from that. And you mentioned early on that, it's one thing when something happens to you, but it's another thing when it happens to a loved one. And I see that wholly. I think that my accident and my paralysis impacted my family way more than it ever did me. And I think some of that is because I think that when it happens to you, you sort of still are in control. You're in control of what you do from the situation. And when you have something terrible happen to a loved one, you're completely out of control. There's nothing in your power that you can do to make it better. And that's like so much worse.
Yeah. When you also get to a place where, again, I don't know how loving and how honest your family was with each other, but my family always kind of was like a tough love type of thing. And my mom eventually, once I kind of became sick and she was like overly protective and all that, but there's still something missing in my family where there's not a lot of, there's still love and we still say it, but I've always been I've always tried to break that chain and be a better person and try to show love to people, even people that are not family or friends. But when you're in a place where, you're not used to hearing compliments and you're not used to, I don't know, like a certain just way of speaking, you don't think you have much of an effect on people, even though it's kind of clear as day, like she's your sister and all that. But you don't really think like, oh, a car accident of mine is going to make someone go into a dark place in their head, even though, it makes sense now in hindsight, I'm sure. But you don't think that you have an effect on anybody that way because you're you. And again, like we all have our insecurities and we all just think that we're just whatever. We're just a person. And how do I affect the world? And so I'm sure, I don't know, maybe you had that thought for a while and then realized when you kind of found out all these things about your sister, it's like, it's sweet because you feel like, oh my God, like someone loves me on that level. But then it's also like you have the thought of like, oh shit, like I might have messed someone up. Obviously it's not your fault, but you still have that kind of guilt.
Totally. Well, and I, many years after my accident, I actually, went to try to get a stem cell treatment, an experimental stem cell treatment. And I was really nervous to tell my family and tell the world that was something that I wanted to do. And the reason why I decided to do it wasn't necessarily because I was like really hell bent on walking again. It was mostly, I just really wanted to live a really healthy life if possible. And I knew that if I could gain any sort of function or feeling or something, that would help me, have a longer existence. And so, but my point is when I first started sharing with people, even like coworkers and swimmers and things like that I wanted to go to India for the stem cell treatment, it was like this like magnetic light bulb and this like overly joyous moment for everyone. And everybody was like super supportive. And I had like all these cheerleaders and things. And it was a really humbling experience for me because it was really the first time that I understood what my paralysis and my disability meant to everybody else in my life. Mm-hmm. And, it was like all of a sudden, rather than my dad worrying about me going off to this underdeveloped country to get an experimental stem cell treatment, he was actually, excited for me. And it was that was a really interesting and just sort of like a very reflective period for me to just kind of take in and understand like, wow, all of this stuff that had happened to me in my life, it impacted everybody else as well.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't know how quick a tragedy can, because, again, I know you said your family was going through a lot of trouble and turmoil, but, you don't really know, again, when people die or get into a terrible accident, you really don't know how much of a staple they are in that family and how much they impact everyone until something bad happens. Because you just think, okay, I'm just the daughter of this and I'm the sister of her and then, I'm this friend and I'm all that. And, obviously being a person who didn't see much popularity beforehand, and now people genuinely care about what you have to say and care about you going to India and trying to help however you can to benefit your life. And it's a whole different experience. And, I'm sure you probably didn't imagine one little thing not only changed your life, but it changed a lot of other people's lives because now they're invested in, the betterment of Ryan.
Totally. Yeah.
Obviously, how did it affect your father and your mother? Obviously, I know they were going through a, breakup and all that, but.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, they were having a hard time just coexisting and even a couple of years leading up before my accident, this is something that I haven't really spoken much about, but my mom was really struggling and I didn't understand it. I was a kid and I, the first signs that I knew something was wrong is it would get to be about nighttime and she would start just like kind of acting goofy, and I didn't really understand it. And it kind of continued on and progressed to where my dad had gone to bed, my sister had gone to bed, and my mom would just kind of not be herself. She wouldn't talk correctly, or her behavior was really off. And so it got to the point where I was worried, but I didn't understand it, and I didn't really know what to do. And so I didn't approach anybody else about it. And I just kept, I guess, perpetuating it really. And got to the point where I would make my dad and my sister's lunch that night before I went to bed for the next day, whereas my mom was supposed to be doing it, and, try to get her to go to bed or try to get myself to go to bed. And, and this occurred for well over a year of just trying to figure out what's going on. And it was, pretty scary. But I didn't understand it. And it was finally one day or one night, she was kind of chasing me around the house and just really upset at me. And I didn't know why. And I knew that if I went upstairs, it would wake my dad. And I did it anyways. And I went upstairs and I ran into my bedroom and I slammed the door. And so it woke my dad, and I could hear them having a conversation, but it wasn't anything like that I had imagined it to be or dreamed. It just was a very subtle conversation. They both went to bed. And long story short, it kind of just, it didn't go anywhere from that. My dad knew now that my mom was being strange, but, kind of approached me and asked what I wanted to do about it. And I didn't really know because, again, I didn't understand. I didn't know what was happening. And so it wasn't until my accident happened and I was laying in a hospital bed, and one of my friends came to visit me, and he said, I think that your mom smells like alcohol. And that was like the first time that I really thought that could be the reason why she was acting strange. At that point I had no idea. I was a kid, and I thought maybe she was taking sleeping pills. I didn't really know, and I didn't understand. But so that night I looked in her purse and I did find bottles of alcohol. And so then that's when I first found out, and I was in the hospital, struggling my own self, and now trying to figure out, how do I move from this? And so, like I said, my accident really kind of spiraled everything. And so, as I was healing and getting better and back at home, things were just getting worse for my mom. And it wasn't until I was in college really that she hit what you would call her rock bottom, and she ended up having a seizure at her work and was sent to the hospital and was in a forced rehab program there. And she recovered. She hasn't drank since then, and that was 20 years ago. And
oh, that's awesome.
But it is awesome, and I commend her for that. But it's really, really hard because I can't forget all the moments that where she was, and I want to. And she, to this day we have a relationship, and she's a really great nana to my two kids, and I love that. But it's still, our relationship is strained, and that's really unfortunate. And I think I've come to a point in my life where I don't understand it, and I will never understand it, but I am come to terms with it, I guess. And
yeah,
and it is what it was what it was, and it is what it is. And I think I mentioned to you that it's something that we haven't talked about. I don't think we've talked about her drinking since she was in her rehab facility. And I don't know if it's, I don't know if that's for better or for worse or what. And I did tell you that I did write about it in my book. And so obviously it's something that's important to me, and it's a big piece of my life.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, I mean,
it's hard.
Again, like I said to you before, like I wasn't trying to pry in your life, and also didn't want to get on here just to beat your mom up, because I'm very happy for her that she is sober and she's doing much better. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because obviously I told you my Uncle Bill just recently passed because of he had many health complications, but it all started from alcoholism. And obviously, so I have an affiliation or an understanding for what you're kind of going through, even though I wasn't as close with my uncle as you were with your mother. But I saw a person who deteriorated and became a different person and then tried to get sober, and then people around him enabled him to go back to it. And he suffered. And of course, I'm happy that he's gone because he's not suffering anymore. But I see a lot of people around him who are still pissed and don't want anything to do with him. And he didn't get to see his grandchildren anymore because some of his his great-grandchildren, because his granddaughter, she had experiences with him where he just was drunk and off his ass and just ruined relationships, but she held the grudge, and now he's dead, and I don't know how she feels about him. But it's like, your mom obviously is still alive, and I'm not going to sit here and try to condone what she did, but obviously she didn't do the worst of things to you, and she is still around. And I don't know, hopefully someday you can make the amends that you need to make, because you don't want someone to die and then have that thought of, man, I could have fixed this. And again, I know it's not your fault, and maybe it's not even your job to fix it. But as a person who is as strong as you are and has been through so much, sometimes you have to be kind of the light in the family to bring it all together, even though I know there's probably a party that feels like I don't have to because you didn't start this. But I mean, again, you don't know how much pain she's in and how much she hasn't shared with you and how much she has guilt. I don't know because I don't know your mother.
No, absolutely.
But I mean, the fact that she is still a great grandma and she has changed a lot and fixed her life. You're at a point in your life where maybe, and again, I don't know, but you can try to make more amends and have these honest conversations with her, because, you don't know how long she is going to be around. No one does. You don't know how long you're going to be around, because look how quickly your life almost ended. So, maybe at some point you can have a deep, conversation like you and I are having right now, but with her, and maybe it'll never get to be the way it ever was, because look, I've made amends with my father, and we've had some bad terms, and we're probably never going to be father and son, but we're at least close friends. And I'll take what I can get, because, I hated him for a while. But I realized he didn't molest me. He didn't beat me. He was a drunk to some degree himself, but also he just was kind of verbally abusive to some degree. But he's not the worst person in the world, and he is getting older, and he's got, sicknesses, and I don't want anything bad to happen to anyone. And I just wanted to fix it, even though it wasn't my job to fix. So there's some parallels between you and my life. Weirdly enough, that's why it all comes out. But yeah, like I said, I don't want you to hold too much. Again, it's not my business, but I don't want you to just hold your mother to the fire too long, because like I said, you just never know how long someone has, because someone's life can end in an instance. And the fact that you have a relationship is something positive, but it could be better. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think, something as I'm getting closer to publishing my book, and I know that there are some of these stories inside of my book, that I know that I need to have a conversation with her, and I know that I need to reach out to her, and I am super hopeful that we can have an open conversation about things. And I really, really do hope that it's a positive experience for both of us. And because I think you're right, I think that, something needs to be said, and with any luck, she will understand beyond what I think that she might. I'm very worried that she may be closed off towards my experience with her when I was younger, and I really hope that she can be open to listening, and that we can rectify some things. And because I think ultimately I know that through it all, there's never been a point that she didn't love me, and there's never been a point that she didn't try for me. I know that,
right,
for everything that I am. So.
And she might be super embarrassed, and she probably blames herself for a lot of, she might even blame herself for your accident. I don't know, but she might blame herself for a lot of what did happen to you, and maybe she could have been a better mother, because we go down this road of, we just start ridiculing ourselves. And obviously your relationship is more strained than it used to be. And I'm sure she, she probably blames all that on herself, whether it's all her fault or not. And it's probably hard for her to talk about because, she has to, she has to come out and tell everybody, I have a problem and, it's my fault. And that's not easy for a person to do,
Right.
especially to her kids.
Mm-hmm.
But the main reason why I kind of juxtapose from when you were talking about your kids is because, obviously we all, our family, especially since you have a family that you do love, and some people have families that aren't the greatest, but you have your own family now, and obviously you're your own woman and you're your own mother now. You're a mother now. So, was there any, and it's the last real question, like especially about your mother, to kind of beat her up a little bit, but was there any kind of pressure or any feeling in yourself, like, wanting to kind of be the opposite of what your mother was, because her genes are in you, and, were you afraid to ever go down that road of whether of alcoholism or just whatever it was, because now you're a mother, and you don't want to pass on, because I think people don't realize you have to break the chain in the bad parts of your family. So a lot of times it's usually passed on from her mom to the next. And again, I'm not saying that's the case, but not everything from your family is always great. That's passed on to you.
Right.
And so like, was there any pressure in your mind to like go the opposite of your mother, or were you afraid to be your mother when you get older in the negative ways?
So, yeah, no, I mean, I think that like the moments that I remember in my early childhood of my mom, like she was great, and she was always doing crafting projects with us and playing with us, and doing her best. And I do remember that. And in terms of like, was I ever worried about becoming an alcoholic? And the answer is absolutely not, because I saw it, I saw it firsthand. And so I think that, and me as a mom, I think that I am, as best as I can be, the very best of her.
Right. Oh, that really should be the end goal. Like, as I said, passing all these things down, you got to kind of be like a chameleon. You take all the good things from all the people in your life and just delete the bad stuff, because you're going to be part of your mother. Like I said, making amends with my father. There's still qualities of my father's in me, whether I like it or not. And I keep the good ones and I delete the bad ones. He was a hard worker. That's good to keep, but he also abused some things, and that's, you get rid of. And I don't want to beat my father up anymore because I've done that enough, but that's what you got to do. You have interactions with people, and not every person has some bad in them and every person has some good in them, regardless if you want to admit it or not. But not you personally, but anyone. And
sure, no, of course.
And so, yeah, like your mom had something that not necessarily the most, it's not the greatest thing to admit, but it's also, she also was a good mom, and she did do a lot of great things, and she's become a great grandmom, of course. And, so like I said, you just got to find ways to adapt to all the people that are in your life. And there's people in your life that you probably are like, yeah, they're great, but they have some things I don't necessarily agree with or like. Maybe they vote a certain way or whatever. They have feelings towards something else that you don't agree with. But, they're in your life for a reason, and it does benefit you to have them there. And if your mom was such a terrible person, obviously you probably would have never kept her in your life.
Right.
And again, everyone is susceptible to what she went through. It's just circumstances and how your life changed. Like, your life changed for a different reason than hers. And so, you like I said, I think everybody feels like they're so far from some of these things, and they're just not. You're one bad door, you're one left turn or right turn away from going down a really wrong path, whether you would know it, whether it's your fault or someone else's. It's not hard to become an alcoholic. It just isn't. There's a lot of pain and emotions that you go through in life. And again, I don't know what was ailing your mom, but and I'm not condoning what she did, but it's not hard to become her. Like I said, my Uncle Bill was a great person. He was a super talented, smart guy, but he took a path and it took him down a really wrong, rough road. And I think some people think that it's just the bad people that go through this stuff. And no, man, most of the good people are the ones that really suffer. And so, but yeah, I think it's great that you still continue to have a relationship with her, and you have morphed into your own person, but with also adapting the qualities that your mother, father, sister, and friends and whoever else you come across, you've adapted to their good qualities, and it evolved and made you who you are right now.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
So obviously again, I know you had some stuff written down. Is there anything else before we kind of get into what you're doing today and how you've really developed? I know you had stuff written down. So is there anything else you really wanted to delve into with your story? Because I don't want to miss anything.
No, honestly, like that's what I mostly focused on.
Okay. Yeah. So what are you doing nowadays with your life? I know you're married, you have kids, but what else is going on?
Yeah. So yes, like you said, I'm married. I have 2 kids, a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old boy. My husband and I own a small business, which is a swim team that we coach and run. And I just completed writing my memoir. It's something that I started writing about a dozen years ago and not really knowing why or what stories that I chose. And to be honest, I wrote it completely out of order, chronologically speaking, and just kind of, originally it was more of, I think, like a cathartic experience, almost like journaling. Mm-hmm. And then, when I was pregnant with my youngest, I realized like, hey, I really want to do this. I want to write a book. And so I started putting it all together, and at this point now he's 2, and I'm still finishing it up, but it's pretty much at this point done, and it's about to go to print in the next month or so. Yeah, and I'm really excited about it. I'm really nervous about it. Gives me like exciting butterflies that also make me want to barf pretty much any given moment of the day.
Why is that? Because you're talking about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to just like put yourself out there and you write a book, but then it's another thing that you're writing a book about you, you know?
Right.
And, you know, there's stories in there that I haven't shared with people before. And since I wrote it over the last, you know, decade plus, there are stories in there that when I started editing it, I went back and I had forgotten about entirely. And there are stories that towards the end of the book that were completely changed based on like what I thought they were going to be 10 years ago. You know, meeting my husband and having kids, and, you know, all of that stuff snuck its way into the book that I had never imagined for myself before. And so it's been a real roller coaster to put it all together. And I'm sure I'm going to lose a lot of sleep right before it goes to print. But I think that ultimately I'm doing it because I feel like it's important. Yeah. And I don't know to whom or to what, or, you know, what's going to happen once it goes to print, but I know that I'm proud of myself for doing it.
Yeah, you should be. I mean, I'm proud of you, and I just kind of got to know you, but I mean, you've been through so much. I think you can handle a little barfage as far as you talking about yourself. I mean, it's like I said, we're just getting to know each other, and I genuinely have a lot of love and affection for you because you're a very inspiring person, and you've overcome so much, and you're continuing to just defy the odds, if you will, and you know, you won't give up, and that's something that's very commendable.
No, thank you.
Of course. Have you been able, you know, with what you do with, you know, getting kids to go swimming and train them and all, have you ever found a young you to train, like a prodigy?
You know, I haven't yet. I always kind of keep my eye out because it's, you know, it's the disability world is, you know, it's a small, intimate world. And I think that if you have the ability to grab a hold of somebody that, you know, maybe needs some guidance to say like, things are going to be okay. And look at all these things you can do. Yeah. You know, that's something that I always kind of look out for. But, you know, when it comes down to it, I think that, you know, a disability is something that's very similar to just normal struggles that people have. And so I relate to a lot of my swimmers and a lot of the kids in different ways that are because of my disability and also not because of my disability.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just like a side note, but was there ever, because of all the damage that was done to you, was there ever a possibility that you thought maybe you wouldn't be able to have any kids?
So there was never anything biologically in terms that should keep me from having kids,
Okay.
but the whole process of the pregnancy was always it was really nerve wracking because we didn't know if I would be able to carry the baby to term or be able to feel contractions or have a natural birth. All of those things we just had to kind of like fly by the seat of our pants. And so I feel very, very lucky that I was able to have two very non explosive births, and I was able to birth both my children naturally. And I think there was a lot of luck and happenstance involved in them coming into the world safely. And I just am very appreciative of the universe for that.
Yeah, and you're going to be a huge role model and example of, hopefully your kids will grow up and, the girl like you who's looking for friends and, maybe they'll pay attention to someone they see who's a little off or whatever you want to call it. I don't really have a filter, so my terminology is always shitty. But, you find someone who's just, a little different and they won't be afraid to be their friend. And they realize, someone like you,
So,
hopefully they don't have to go through what you went through, but maybe they'll find someone who did.
Yeah, I would say both of my sons are very, very observant of the world and extremely compassionate just by nature. And so I'm very blessed.
How do you explain especially to your 7-year-old who's a little more, he's older, how do you kind of explain to him why mommy is the way she is? Because obviously he doesn't really understand.
Yeah, and it's a hard one because he's at the age where it's something he's always known and it's his normal as well.
Right.
But he's at the age that he has learned now that it's not everybody else's normal. And, I've witnessed watching him on a playground structure and having a kid walk over into him and say, "Why is your mom in a wheelchair?"
Yeah.
And, and I don't know his true inner feelings, and I'm not sure that he does either, but for the most part, he just kind of blows it off and is like, "My mom was in an accident. What's it? Let's go play on the merry-go-round. I don't care."
Yeah. Next question.
And so at this point, I think it's really like a non-issue for him because that's all he knows. But he does know that it is different.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's the only way you can kind of be. Because, again, like I said, going back to where you were at trying to find your own identity, and obviously you didn't have an example where he does.
Mm-hmm.
He has an example of how bad it could be. And, the reality is your life wasn't that bad. You just weren't noticed. And a lot of kids go through that. It sucks. But,
right.
With him, there's always the peer pressure of, hey, you want to be cool, make fun of that kid. And it's like, well, I can't. My mom's this, and, this kid, he's deaf or whatever. Why would I make fun of him? Because, so I think that's you're a good example, obviously, because of someone you obviously really close to him, you love each other, but he now knows that, hopefully he knows that, treat everyone the same and be respectful because you just don't know what they're going through. Yeah. I'm just trying to figure that we covered everything. I thought we did. I just don't want to kind of rush your story and,
Yeah, no, I feel very like at peace with our conversation, and I feel like I, kind of covered everything that I sort of set out to talk about today. And
good. I'm glad. Like I said, yeah, I tell people all the time, like a lot of these people I have on, I just meet and we just connect. And I'm really big on with the disability community, people just supporting each other because that's something that's really missed in our community, especially when we have different conditions. A lot of times people want to support each other when it's like, oh, okay, I'm blind, not you're blind, or visually impaired or whatever. But we're in the same boat here. And it's like, okay, you and I are in a different boat in a way, but we're still in the same, ocean. We're next to each other. We're around each other. We have similarities. We know each other's pains, and in some ways, we may not be able to know exactly what it's like to be in a car accident, or you don't know what it's like to have all your skin burned off or whatever. But we know what true pain feels like emotionally, physically, and we've gone down similar heartaches, and we know the trauma of what life can bring. So, I don't know why I wouldn't be able to just understand your story. Just because I can't completely understand doesn't mean I can't try to understand and accept what you have been through. And Like I said, anything you need from me, just, your book, like I said, this podcast will come out some point next year, but I want you to, do you want to tell the name of your book and your memoir and all that?
Yeah. Yeah. So my book is entitled "When I Grow Up, I Want to Be a Chair."
Okay. Well, can you explain the name? I like the name, but.
Yeah, thanks. So there's actually a lot of truth to it. When when you're like preschool age kid, people are always asking you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And at one point, I'm dead serious, I told people that I wanted to be a chair.
Okay.
And
okay.
I never actually understood it. And it was always sort of just like laughed at by my family. And I tried to, sort of rationalize it as like, maybe it's because I had a baby sister at the point and nobody would let me hold her. And so I just wanted to hold, like, I don't know where it came from. And like I said, like my mom was great in the sense that she let me have my own ideas and imagination when I was little. And so she just went with it. And, and so I talk about in my book a little bit, like, was this like something that I, was having a premonition on, that I ended up being in this wheelchair when I was, for most of my existence. But, and so it's just a really fitting title, just kind of goes full circle. And at the end of my book, I talk about, the other things that, I wanted to be a mom and, things like that. I wanted to be a writer and I didn't know it.
I love that you can tell you have a dark sense of humor too, because you kind of are making fun of yourself in a way as well. Which, again, like I tell people, like, a lot of this stuff may come from pain, but it's how we cope and how we deal. And, like I said, you listen to the title of my podcast, it's my blurred opinion. It comes from being, I like puns and, I'm making fun of myself. But, it also comes from a place of goodness and, but it takes me back to a story where when I was in court, because we were suing the hospital, their mistreatment of me when I was younger, and they had me on the stand, just, they wanted to just kind of get a feel for me. I was like 5 years old and they asked me what I wanted to be. And I said in front of the entire court that I wanted to be a tiger. And everyone laughed, the jury, the defense team, like everything. Just and of course I was embarrassed because I'm just a shy kid and whatever. But you kind of really, it's funny when you're a kid and you say things and you don't really, you just say what you want to be. I mean, of course you have the kids like, oh, I want to be Michael Jordan or whatever. And it's like, okay, that's cute. But when you actually have things like you want to be a chair or I want to be a tiger. It's like, yeah, okay. I guess in some ways you kind of achieved what you wanted to be, but
right.
I'm still not a tiger, unfortunately. So unfortunately, but yeah, so, okay. Like I said, I think that's it. Like I said, is if there's anything else you want to promote, like I said, I'll put all your links in your social media and your book and everything when it comes out. But if there's anything else you want to promote, please do. Cause like I said, it's your episode.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. And, appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to have you on. You're a perfect example of someone that is inspiring and that does a lot, and you overcome so much, and I'm very grateful for people like you that exist, because you push the envelope and you make it, and it sounds stupid, but you make it look cool to be disabled. Like there's people that just,
thank you.
Because, I understand the trauma and all the struggles and how you got to where you got to, and I know it wasn't easy. Not even just physically, just mentally, just how you even got yourself to be where you are today is not easy at all. And, obviously you should be super commended and all that. And like I said, I'm very grateful to have you on, and I hope we can keep in touch, and anything you need from me, I'll support you. And,
likewise.
Okay, great. And we will talk soon. Like I said, thank you again for being on.
Yeah. Thank you.
And, we'll talk soon. Later. And, I'll see you later.
Okay, sounds good.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys, that was great. I just want to say rest in peace to my Uncle Bill. As I said, kind of in there, just lost him. And just so you know, this episode is being recorded on December 9th. So when this comes out, it'll be probably mid 2022. So, but I did want to put it out there. I did say something on Instagram and Facebook. So, but I'll miss him, and he's a great guy. And, but as far as Ryan goes, she's a great person, and she's a good way to start off the third year. So thank you guys again for joining the show, and just being a supporter of mine and just all these people. You know, I need you guys. We got to stick together, and we shall do so. Whoa, I turned that up too loud. See you guys later, and take care of each other. Bye, guys.